Yesterday, I said a lot of mean and hurtful things about Xerxes, the king of kings, the king of Persia, the great king, the king of lands. And I really didn't mean it that way. I was more just quoting things that other people had said about him, but I still understand how it could come off as hurtful. And even though it's highly unlikely an oddly specific genie will one day appear and grant me a meal with King Xerxes, which I would really enjoy, if it were to happen, now I fear it's going to be awkward. So I'd like to take a few minutes today and talk about some of the good things that I can deduce from the historical record about King Xerxes, the king of the Book of Esther. And also I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the adventures that he went on early in his reign that no doubt come into play in the Book of Esther. Xerxes had to have been a great administrator who was well trained in the finer things of life. Those are nice things to say about someone. We actually know quite a bit about Xerxes' upbringing and the upbringing of Persian princes in general, because of all the things, there's a conversation probably written down by Plato a few decades after the fact here. He was an Athenian who had great admiration for his teacher, the very famous Socrates. Now, Socrates didn't write anything down, but Plato wrote down things playing the role of Socrates. Maybe some of it involves actual quotations. Maybe the writings of Plato with the character of Socrates are just meant to encapsulate the mannerisms and the way this guy approached conversation and philosophy and all of this. But there's one of these in particular that is a dialogue between a guy named Alcibiades and Socrates. And these two were close. They were good pals, to put it lightly, off and on over the years. But much like Professor X and Magneto, their values went in different directions as they aged. And so what we get in this first dialogue that is probably written down by Plato between Alcibiades and Socrates is a dance back and forth regarding the important things in life and civic virtue and the individual morality and what is truly good to pursue. And in the course of their hypothetical dialogue that Plato probably gives us, there's one big chunk where Socrates describes the manner in which these Persian kings were raised. And he specifically says this applies to Xerxes. So let me read you a little bit of the relevant portion here as Socrates describes Xerxes' upbringing. He says, "Still greater is the difference among the Persians, for no one entertains a suspicion that the father of a prince of Persia can be anyone but the king. Such is the awe which invests the person of the queen that any other guard is needless. And when the heir of the kingdom is born, all the subjects of the king feast, and the day of his birth for ever afterwards is kept as a holiday and time of sacrifice by all of Asia. Whereas when you and I were born, Alcibiades, as the comic poet says, the neighbors hardly knew of the important event. But after the birth of the royal child, he's tended, not by a good-for-nothing woman nurse, but by the best of the royal eunuchs who are charged with the care of him, and especially with the fashioning and right formation of his limbs, in order that he may be as shapely as possible, which being their calling, they are held in great honor. And when the young prince is 7 years old, he's put upon a horse and taken to the riding masters and begins to go out hunting. And at 14 years of age, he's handed over to the royal schoolmasters, as they're termed. These are 4 chosen men reputed to be the best among the Persians of a certain age, and one of them is the wisest, another the justest, a third the most temperate, and a fourth the most valiant. The first instructs the young king in the Magianism of Zoroaster, which is the worship of the gods, and teaches him also the duties of his royal office. The second, who is the justest, teaches him all the ways to speak the truth. The third, or most temperate, forbids him to allow any pleasure to be lord over him, that he may be accustomed to be a free man and king indeed, lord of himself first and not a slave. The most valiant trains him to be bold and fearless, telling him that if he fears, he is to deem himself a slave, whereas Pericles gave you, Alcibiades, for a tutor Zophorus, a Thracian, a slave of his who was past all other work. And then it just goes on and back into the conversation that these two guys are hypothetically having. as described to us probably by Plato. But did you hear how much we caught there about what Xerxes was very intentionally trained to be? And I don't remember if I specifically read the run-up to this or not, but it's important that you know that Xerxes himself is specifically named in this same paragraph by Socrates as someone who received this training of the 4 virtues of Persia. And I'm going to write down those 4 virtues and what is supposed to come out of those 4 virtues, what those 4 virtues are supposed to practically look like when they manifest in an ideal king of Persia, because I think it's going to be very helpful data as we're working through the book of Esther. And obviously Xerxes plays an enormous role in this whole thing, and especially where a theme of the book is the insecurity and manipulatability of the king. We're going to find that even these virtues that are instilled in him are going to be things that the clever heroes of the story can weaponize against Xerxes for a good and God-ordained outcome. It's so funny that I thought we were going to get into Xerxes' Greek campaign today because of how time is. We're not actually going to do that, and there's no way I'm going to shortchange that story. We're going to have a good, full episode conversation about the very famous Greek campaign against Leonidas and the Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae and against Themistocles and the Athenian navy at the Battle of Salamis. This is a watershed moment in history, and I think it's a watershed moment in the evolution of the character of Xerxes. And I think if you look closely at the timeline of the book of Esther, we're going to get both a pre-disastrous Greek campaign version of Xerxes, and we're going to get a post-disastrous Greek campaign version of King Xerxes. I think we see both in the pages we're about to look at, so I got to give that proper time and attention. But this episode is about saying nice things about my hypothetical, possible, magical future dinner partner, and we've already said some. He had wonderful things instilled in him. He had a great upbringing. The second thing I would like to say, which will be more on display tomorrow when we get to the Greek campaign once again, is that he was a wonderful organizer. He was a leader who had a broad vision and could include and work with people from all walks of life and all different cultural ends of the earth. And when this guy set his mind to something, he was willing to really, really go at it, as we will see in how he executes this Greek campaign, even if it didn't happen to exactly work out the way he would have wanted it to. All right, yesterday we learned some wobbly things about the character of Xerxes. Today we talked about some of the positive things about the character of Xerxes. Tomorrow, Greece. And then there you have it. We are suddenly chronologically concurrent with the book of Esther, which I think is pretty exciting. All right, my kid has a baseball game. I have to go to it. He bats leadoff right now, and if I don't leave right now, I'm not going to get to see him get his first at bat, which I'm very excited about. So I'm just going to leave. All right, I'm going. I'm walking away from the microphone right now. I'm actually leaving. I'm going to go do this. I want to talk about Xerxes and the Persian, but I got baseball. The Matt 10-minute Bible podcast. Let's do this again soon.
Thank you to all of you who have taken the time to leave a rating and review on your podcast apps. We're grateful because it's encouraging and it helps new people find their way here.